Hey, what's up, everybody? Bryce here. Welcome back to the Relationships Made Simple for Men podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about emotional abuse, and this is a really common topic when we're doing marriage counseling or just working with anybody who's in a relationship. People want to know if what they're doing is wrong or hurtful, or if what they're experiencing is abuse. Because if it is, that's something that you probably don't want to put up with in your relationship, and you should know what's what. Sometimes people will feel hurt by things that are said, and they will assume that it's abusive or harmful just because it hurts. But that doesn't mean that it's abuse. And sometimes people will put up with stuff because they're used to it. They dealt with it in their family systems growing up. And so they have this tolerance for abuse when it really isn't helping. Having a high tolerance for abuse is not a good thing. It's just like pain, right? Like if you were in the gym and you couldn't feel pain, you could blow out your muscles, tear your muscles. You need to be able to feel that pain so that you don't hurt yourself or allow someone to keep hurting you. So I'm going to talk about abuse, but first, I want to talk about neglect, which is a close cousin to abuse. But in adult relationships, I wouldn't necessarily call that abuse. Some might. This is my opinion. But the difference is that in neglect, if you're a fully functioning adult, you can just leave that relationship. You don't have to put up with that. And it can be really, really harmful. But the difference is that no one is coming to attack you coming into your space. They're actually leaving. And that's different than abuse. With kids, neglect is abuse because kids can't take care of themselves. Adults can. So hopefully that subtle difference makes sense. Some examples of emotional neglect may be someone who doesn't want to talk to you, they just walk away from you, they're not willing to go and get help. You just don't get much from them. And unfortunately, it's really hard to work with emotional neglect because a lot of times the person that's leaving doesn't really care. That's how they feel relief. They're like, when I walk away from you, they may experience more power there. It's a power move. The person who has more power in the relationship is the one who cares less. And if the person leaving isn't experiencing much pain, maybe they do feel it, but they don't allow themselves to, or they think that you're going to stick around no matter what they do, then they might not be feeling as much pain as you. And often in those cases, what people in emotionally neglectful relationships have to do is to leave, or at least hold the boundary that if this keeps happening, I'm going to leave. Unless we get help or you get help, I'm going to leave. And sometimes that shifts the balance and creates some leverage so that the person that's leaving and walking away and ignoring you or disregarding your feelings actually starts to feel some pain. Like I could lose this relationship. And men and women both do this. I find that men are more likely to be emotionally neglectful. We're just used to bottling those emotions up and compartmentalizing them. So for some reason, I think it's easier for men, but it doesn't mean that women couldn't do it too, or both of you could do it. Whenever I hear about someone experiencing their partner or both of them experiencing the relationship as just like roommates, that's a sign to me that there is emotional neglect, probably on both sides. It's just a very passive relationship. Even if you don't have conflict, it can still be neglectful, right? You're just not connecting with each other, sharing more, getting vulnerable with each other, and you're not supporting each other. You might be supporting each other physically in what you do, which some people are okay with that for a period of time. If you're raising kids, sometimes people do this for years. And then when the kids leave the house, all of a sudden they're like, well, what do we have here? We were just kind of in it for the kids and doing stuff for the kids and kind of helping each other with driving and working and stuff around the house, but there really isn't a lot of connection here. We just haven't worked on that. And other times it might feel more blatant, like your partner is retaliating against you. They're giving you the silent treatment, the cold shoulder, rolling the eyes, and walking away. And some people deal with this every single day. And it can be really crazy making and really frustrating. But you don't have to stay in this pattern if you feel like your partner is emotionally neglecting you. The key, if you're the one that's leaned in more and they're leaned out, is to really bolster yourself by reaffirming and reassuring yourself that you're a good person that just wants a healthy, connected, loving relationship, and that that is okay and it's valid and you deserve it. And by also leaning back some to come to your center and doing what you need to do for you and stop depending so much on them to show up if they have a pattern of not doing it. And some people can get really scared of this because they're like, if I lean back, then they might even go further away from me and the relationship will just end. Like I'm the thing that's keeping this afloat. But that's not really the way you want a relationship to work, anyways. You don't want to be the one that's constantly doing things and setting up therapy appointments or initiating all the talks or doing all the planning and your partner's not doing anything. So, in order to change the pattern, you do have to make some shift in you, and that will change the pattern. There's no guarantee that it will make the relationship work out, but it will highlight the truth of what's already there. Sometimes when people that are leaned in too much lean back, their partner feels more of the distance and they naturally want to lean more into the relationship. They don't want to lose the relationship. And sometimes, yeah, it just highlights the reality that they're not really in it. Either way, if you're experiencing emotional neglect in your relationship, it's important to come back to you first because you're too much over there. It's kind of a version of a codependent pattern, right? You lean in, they kind of give you a little bit sometimes, just enough for you to keep going and you keep chasing and following. And they just get to stay comfortable over there in their safe, protected space where they can just give a little, whenever. Now, if you are a man who's being emotionally neglectful, you might not even know what that looks like in your own behavior. So one way to assess your emotional availability is just to look at how much time and energy you've put into learning about yourself and emotions and relationships. If it's basically none, then you probably don't have a lot of emotional availability. You don't even know what you don't know. And so even though you feel like you show up emotionally with them, and maybe you are vulnerable at times, you're still a rookie, you're still a newbie. And that might not be enough for your partner, especially if they've been doing a lot of work and you haven't, it's going to feel imbalanced. Relationships are not just about love, although that's an important component. I think we naturally experience this for other people. Relationships take skill, they take education, they take practice. And if you haven't been doing that in any containers, any settings, odds are you're not very good at it. So my challenge to you would be to learn and practice. Read books, listen to podcasts. You're listening to this one right now. Good. Take courses, get some therapy or coaching, join a group. Those are the simplest ways to start to build your capacity and your vocabulary and your skill set. Some other behaviors that can show up are you need space, but you take like days and you don't return back to conversations and revisit them. 24 hours is about as long as I'd want anyone to go in a marriage without revisiting a topic. And even that's pushing it. Really, it should be a few hours, right? Like if you can't regulate yourself, and given you have the time, sometimes it'll take more hours if you're at work or traveling or something. But if you can't revisit the conversation within a few hours in some way, A, it really sends a message that you don't care that much about it or them, your partner. And B, it shows that you're not good at regulating your nervous system. You don't have the skills yet to work with your narrative and look at what you have to own and come back with a coherent idea as far as what's happening within you, because that is what needs to happen for repair to happen. You have to be able to come to your partner and say, here's what I think is going on with me. Here's why I think that's painful. Here's what I need. And I'm also open to hearing what you're thinking and what you need. And then the conversation can flow from there. It's also possible that you might just have a lifestyle that isn't set up for a lot of connections. Some guys work, they travel for work, they're out of town, they don't talk to their partners for days, they're physically not there. And although it might not seem like you have control of that because that's what your job is having you do, it can still feel really painful for your partner to just not have you there. And that can be a form of emotional neglect. You have to create space in your life to connect with your partner if you want a really fulfilling relationship. Again, some people don't. It's like a business relationship. I have a job and I get to go do that. And I like doing that. it makes me money, and I get to come home and play with the kids, have that experience, and maybe some connection with you at times. I feel good with that, at least for the time being. Some guys, I think, really decide that that's enough for them. And then I will hear from wives and partners that that's not enough for them. Or maybe they thought it was enough initially, but now it's not. And then you have a problem, right? You set up your life in a way where you're really not that available, and your wife wants more connection and FaceTime with you. And there's even been probably ruptures along the way that haven't been dealt with because you haven't had the time and space to deal with it. And that takes a lot of time and effort to do. And if your life's not set up to do that, it's like tough luck. I don't think that you can really reconnect if you've been disconnected for years and years with just an hour a week or something like that. It will probably take daily effort for months to kind of see what you're working with and what you have. And I think the point I'm trying to make is to not make people wrong who are emotionally neglectful. Some are doing it intentionally, and that needs to be acknowledged and seen. Sometimes it takes a third party to really see if there's intention there or not. But sometimes you might be doing it unintentionally. You were just conditioned to live your life in a certain way, and there isn't much emotional capacity there, much connection, and you're okay with that because that's what you watched your parents have and other people you know. And it might be really confusing that your partner's like, I want more. And you're like, what? We're doing the thing that everyone else does. And then you're seeming like you want more. You're high maintenance and you're making this into a problem. But it shouldn't be looked at as a problem. If you blame your partner for wanting more emotional connection with you, you're going to make it 10 times worse, guaranteed. You have to find a way to get into the emotional gym, do the reps, do the practices, include your partner in this. That is the way to heal emotional neglect if that's present in your relationship. Now, let's talk about emotional abuse. This is intentional abuse, and we'll just start at the most extreme versions. So if you're screaming at your partner and calling them names and attacking their character, really who they are as a human, or weaponizing things from their history that they've told you, vulnerabilities, that is abuse. There's no other way to cut it. And that should have no place in your relationship ever. No matter what your partner did or said, even if they said the same things to you, it does not give you the right to say those things back to them. An eye for an eye is not the way that you want to do relationship. Sometimes when we're working with couples, that's the first thing we have to deal with because it's hard to work on the higher levels of relating if there's so much emotional abuse happening. We have to cut that out completely. It's like an alcoholic drinking. They can't have any of it. And some people, which I find this kind of fascinating, actually feel connected to their partner when there is emotional abuse happening. Because if you think about people that were raised in really chaotic households where there was name calling, maybe physical violence, sometimes that's a really intense experience that feels familiar, because we have to look at what people are getting out of an experience. If you don't get something out of it, you won't keep doing it. So some couples will verbally assault each other and they'll get into these really intense arguments, and they at least experience their partner as caring in those moments. Like I can see you. I might not really like what I see, but at least I can see you and feel you. Some couples will get into patterns where they have these intense disagreements, and then they will reconnect and have makeup sex or something. And so their brain starts to understand that this is the pattern. Oh yeah, we like kind of bottle it up and then we both explode, and then afterwards we reconnect and it puts us at ease. And even though the cycle can be really exhausting, it's familiar, and we like familiar. Our brains like familiar. When we're changing patterns and we don't know what's going to happen on the other side, we can get a lot more anxious. Now, moving into the more subtle forms of emotional abuse, we have someone sharing criticisms or feelings, and it's not uncommon for us to take those personally and for them to hurt, especially if they're brought up in a moment where there's already activation in the air. And sometimes one partner will bring up multiple things in a row, and it can really feel like you're being criticized. And maybe you are being criticized. And maybe some days you'd be okay with that. And some days you've had a really rough day and you can handle none of it. It really depends on what state you're in. But I want you to think about the environment in which you're in. And the Gottmans have done some research on this, and they say that for every complaint you bring, there needs to be about 10 appreciations, 10 positive comments for every one negative comment. And don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure that's accurate, but you can go do your own research. It's something like that. And that makes sense in my world working with couples. Unfortunately, it can't be 50-50 and feel good. We are highly sensitive beings. And so if you live in a home, in an atmosphere where there's a lot of appreciation, thank you for taking out the trash. Thank you for doing the dishes. Thank you for showing up to work today to make money for the family. I really see you trying really hard with trying to work that out with your mom or your dad so that we can have a better experience when they visit. If a lot of that is happening, it's going to be way easier to handle a criticism like, hey, you said you were going to show up to this party with me, but I see you have a work call. If there's been a lot of love and support in the relationship, it's going to be easier to hear that and to own that. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily your partner's responsibility to just keep feeding you acknowledgments. I know what some of you might be thinking, like, oh yeah, that's all it's going to take, is like, I just need way more acknowledgments. That's part of it. You also have to work on your capacity to just take a deep breath, work on not taking this personally, and hearing the criticism. If it's true, if you really said you were going to do this and you didn't, there's no reason to be resistant. You can own that, regardless of how hard of a day you've had, regardless of if you got any appreciations earlier in the day. Like, you can just own that. That's just what being an adult is. You own your mistakes, and you can work on rectifying that, or whatever you have to do. You don't have to rush in to fix it, but at least you can just be honest. The place where I see couples get stuck the most, and this is unnecessarily, is when they take their partner's feelings. And I think this is especially the case with men. They take their partner's feelings personally, and they feel like they're not doing enough. And it feels like a criticism, even though it isn't. If your partner says, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling angry because I don't feel like we get to spend enough time with each other, I want you to look for the intention there. This is coming from love. They want more connection with you. And yes, they're going to have all those feelings attached to it, but you do not have to take this as a criticism. I know it could be framed that way, but it's not the most helpful way to frame it. If you're hearing this from your partner, like, I want more connection, it's your job to be a detective and find out exactly what that means. So this could look like literally getting out a piece of paper and a pen and saying, okay, honey, I really want to understand this experience that you're having. So let me write down what you're saying. And so it's completely clear to me what you're requesting. And then I can get really honest about what I'm willing to do. And we can go from there. I've actually had guys do this with their partners, and it's always gone well. I'm not saying it's always going to go well, but think about putting yourself in their shoes. Like, if you have something you want from your partner and they were to sit down with a pen and paper and get super curious about you and what you're wanting, and to just feel their openness to hear you, that would feel good, right? You want to give your partner the experience that you're wanting to have. And when both of you are doing that together, this is how you share the weight of the relationship. If there's something you really want or you would like, in most cases, you need to practice giving that thing that you want so that you can be a model for the thing that you're wanting. Now, I want to talk about a few other ways that emotional abuse can manifest. And there's a really popular term right now called gaslighting. And if you don't know what that is, it's a way in which you can try to make your partner second guess the things that they're remembering, or the feelings that they're having, or the needs that they have. It's a way to try to make your partner feel crazy. And it's a very manipulative tactic that some people don't even realize they're doing. So take the example of your partner is feeling frustrated about something that you're doing or not doing. And you go on this long monologue about how they shouldn't feel that way because other people wouldn't feel that way. You wouldn't feel that way. Here's all the reasons why it's irrational, illogical, stupid, high maintenance, too needy, whatever it is. And you just crush them with your creative logic. Although this might make a lot of sense to you, because you have to make sense of it in your brain, right, to say it, this can be really, really hurtful on the other side. And over time, as your partner begins, if they really take this on and they begin to second guess themselves, they can start to feel crazy and they can get more and more emotional and more activated because they aren't being seen, they're being blamed, and they are being manipulated. And hopefully this wakes you up if this is something you do. And you should know that most people do some form of this in some way. A lot of times we are trying to change our partner's opinion of us or a situation because it will be to our benefit, especially when we're really activated or anxious. But the more that you can understand that this is something you do, the more you can catch it and check in with your partner and do it less. Because even if you can convince your partner that they're wrong about a subjective matter and experience that they're having, I don't think that that should be a good thing. Being a good debater or salesperson might be good in work settings, but I don't think it really pans out that well in relationships, because in relationships where you have an egalitarian relationship that's intimate and loving and connected, you want equality. So trying to win arguments actually works against that. And the final thing I'll say about emotional abuse is that it can be tricky to spot. A lot of times there are ways that it's showing up on both sides. And sometimes there's a sequence like they said, so I said, and then you roll into the next disagreement weeks or months later, and then that gets brought up and it just gets compounded and layered. So it's helpful to have a professional look at your situation objectively and to help you suss out what's yours, what's theirs, and to develop new patterns of relating. Because sometimes it's the case that there's one partner that is actually more of the instigator and the other partner is just reacting to their partner. And so the work isn't always going to look the same, right? Like if this person kept prodding and pushing, there could be less reactivity on the other side. It doesn't mean that you both don't have your own work to do, but the sequencing can be important to understand. You really want to understand your patterns as a couple. Jenny and I do a lot of work trying to figure out, okay, what type of pattern are we in, right? We have a few that we do. Some we've completely gotten rid of, which is awesome. Some are still there and they change forms. And the quicker that we can see that we're kind of locked into this thing, the easier it is to relax and get out of it. It's kind of like a Chinese finger trap, right? Like you've seen those growing up where you put your fingers in, and if you try to like rip your fingers out, like you could dislocate your fingers, or at least you're going to get stuck, right? So you actually have to relax and slowly pull out of the pattern. Okay, well, I know that was a lot of information I just threw at you. I'm going to be posting a podcast once a week for the time being. I'm telling you this to hold myself accountable, to hold me to my word, and keep listening if you found this helpful. If you want to join a men's group, you can reach out to me. My email is bryce@brycebauer.com, or you can go to my website, brycebauer.com, to read all about the men's groups that I run and the in-person men's retreats that I offer in Utah. Okay, see you, everybody.